Awesome. So we at the Stanford Healthcare Design Challenge are really excited to be welcoming you all today. There's quite a bit of exciting things on the agenda, not least of which is our amazing speaker who will be here to talk to us a little bit about what early stage builders and go-to-market strategy pearls he can share, which for everyone who's involved in this competition, it's kind of the phase that everyone is in, right? Y'all are building, y'all really need to understand what are some of the progress that's been made and the potential pitfalls that exist when you're trying to bridge the chasm between idea and implementation. So as kind of quick overview, here we have some of the folks on the team who will be attending. This will be primarily led by Julia as well as Katrina here. As always, we at the SHDC are a resource to you all who are all of the competitors. So we're excited to be able to participate in this, and I'll show you some of these offerings, but ultimately, if there's anything that we can address, please feel free to use the Q&A function and also just reach out if you need anything. So you are here. It's September 23rd. We're going to be hearing from Jay Rughani, who's an investment partner at A16Z, which is one of the preeminent kind of firms in venture capital and investing and things of that nature. And so Julia will be giving a little bit more context on that. But for now, we have, as Akash was mentioning, we have some events coming up also this week, particularly with Nirav Shah, who's former COO of Kaiser Permanente. So please keep that on your radar. And then, of course, exciting news is that next week on the 30th, you have your applications due. These are the events in October. And just as a very quick recap, once again, of what this what you're really applying into is what we're looking for in this competition. Our prompt is to design a financially sustainable, scalable solution tailored for vulnerable populations that effectively addresses their social determinants of health needs to enhance engagement with healthcare and improve health outcomes. Some of the pearls that have kind of come up over prior conversations and from other mentors is that they're really interested in looking at ideas that consider a very focused population and their specific needs, ideally demonstrating value to all stakeholders who are involved, both the end user as well as those who might be administering the solution. We are looking for those who can outline the necessary steps and feasibility for implementation. And we're interested in those ideas which strengthen really the tripartite aim, or the three pillars of healthcare, affordability, access, and quality. In terms of what we're looking for in the application itself, we want to know who you are, what sort of research you've done into this issue area over the course of the month, why you care about this issue and what your motivations are, and then to offer up a couple of your ideas for us to review and just to sort of see what direction you're going in, so that as we move into the finalist stage, we can be representative in terms of the ideas that are there, as well as the population areas of interest and how you're starting to think about this issue. The judging is going to be a kind of across a number of different domains, and collectively the folks that we have on the judging team have decades of experience within this space in taking ideas from ideas to implementation, I should say, that ultimately will impact the social determinants. And what they'll be looking for is kind of these 5 overarching categories, and we'll be sharing a more rigorous rubric, of course, as the competition approaches, but they're looking for an understanding of the problem, the value of the solution, the feasibility of the implementation, the overall presentation. You know, we always like a nice slide deck, and what differentiates this product or idea or concept from other things which already exist on the market. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it to Julia to share a little bit about our speaker.
Thank you, Aditya. Yeah, because of the month-long speaker series, we've heard from a good range of speakers around social determinants, founders in startups, how people think about navigating different policy and regulatory challenges in this space. And we want to start to turn the page into these really, what are the implementation challenges that early stage startups often face? What can we learn from them? And building on a lot of what Jay has actually already published online about this to have a conversation today. So we're excited to introduce Jay Rughani. He's an investment partner at Andreessen Horowitz, focusing on health and bio investments. His work involves identifying and investing in innovative startups that leverage AI and data products to enhance healthcare delivery and affordability. Like I mentioned, there's a lot available on their website if you want to learn more and dig in deeper, but hoping we pull out some of those key themes today as well. Before joining A16Z, Jay worked at Flatiron Health, an early stage healthcare technology company that was building for people with cancer and was acquired by life science company Roche for $1.9 billion in 2018. So different sides, both as an investor and an operator, and I'll be asking questions about both. Katrina will ask a few questions, and then we'll leave plenty of time for audience questions at the end. So throw those in the chat during this. So yeah, welcome, Jay.
Here we go.
There we go.
Thank you so much for planning this, for putting it together, and for having me. And I'm excited that this will be collaborative and that folks will be on camera later. So we will. I'm looking forward to everyone's questions as well.
So when we first met, oh, too far. We can stop screen sharing for now. When we first met, we were talking about the Digital Health Builder series, and I think this was something that was really exciting for me to see real case studies on different companies at different stages. What about for you? What were some surprising stories or key takeaways that you heard throughout putting those together?
Yeah. So first of all, thanks for the question and everyone's interest. Let me give a little bit of context on my impressions in health tech over the last 10 years and what I think is the number one thing that all of you should be thinking about at this stage if you want to build a important, enduring healthcare technology company that makes a difference in a lot of people's lives, and that is distribution. And for me, my observation over the last 10 years is that there is no shortage of clever product innovation in healthcare. Increasingly, over the last decade, there are more and more technologists like you coming into healthcare, realizing that it's a massive space that with broken consumer experiences, weird economic incentives, broken data flows, et cetera. And yet there is a massive graveyard of digital health companies with very cool ideas who raised money, from venture capitalists, et cetera, and never made it to scale. And my argument in our view is that that's because they couldn't figure out the Rubik's Cube that is distribution in our wonderful but complex $4.8 trillion healthcare system, and 2x that if you're talking about around the world. And some of that was due to an overall immaturity in the market over the last 10 years to adopt some of these novel sort of digital first solutions. Some of it was, weird budget incentives, and we'll talk about sort of how to navigate the enterprise. Some of it was that there wasn't big enough capital markets and enough venture investors who are investing in startups that can help a startup endure the long, painful, almost 2-year sales cycle of selling into a provider or a payer. And that's the number one bottleneck. And, to answer your question now directly with that background, what we have seen certainly over the last 5 years has been an increasing number of entrepreneurs just like you that are taking more creative go-to-market approaches to market. So they're not only innovating on the product and bringing some new technology and care model to healthcare, but they're also innovating in how we go to market. And that's not just going directly B2B or directly B2C, but a number of other sort of go-to-market strategies that I'm happy to talk about. But that's the reason for optimism for me, and that would be my number one piece of advice for all of you, is to think about innovating on the go-to-market in addition to the product when you're working on these companies.
I love that description of distribution as a Rubik's Cube. And that's why this September speaker series has been kind of all over the map, trying to show different perspectives around this problem. And the goal that you mentioned around building enduring companies that actually make a difference in people's lives. I think that's the challenge in a lot of student projects and hackathons, is that they seem to end. You have the idea, you craft a great story, but it's never made that first contact with a potential customer or buyer that's willing to pressure test, does this actually work for my business? So you talked about distribution. For those that aren't familiar, could you give a little more context about what you mean by distribution?
Yeah, so distribution is, look, you're building a product that might solve a particular complexity for a patient. It might solve a clinical or administrative burden for a healthcare provider. It might solve a population management issue for a healthcare insurance company. It might sort of help with new drug development research for a pharmaceutical company. You're looking for problems and you're building a product to solve the problems, obviously. But when it comes to distribution, the question is, well, how is this product going to fit into my customer's existing workflow? Does it replace or augment an existing workflow and a set of tools and services that my end user already uses? Not only is workflow important, but budget is important. So who pays? Well, in our healthcare system, a lot of times the consumer of the product or service is not the one paying for it. So if you're going direct to consumer, is the consumer paying out of pocket, or is their health insurance company paying for it? Or furthermore, is their employer actually paying for it because the employer is self-insured? If you go to a provider, how do you pay for it? What budget does it come out of? How do you justify the ROI of that spend, and so on and so forth? And so when I talk about distribution, it's actually, how do you get the product that you're building to solve a specific problem into the workflow of the user and paid for by the user or someone else to actually scale and distribute your offering?
Nice. So two themes for today are around early stage builders and go-to-market strategy. What I'm hearing is that in that building process, you want to be building within a workflow in mind and within an actual pain point. And then the go-to-market strategy is more around how do you get that paid for and then have someone willing to take a chance to integrate it. How do successful early stage builders leverage data in that process to improve their outcomes and ROI?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, because largely I think today we're talking largely about software products, but this applies to hardware, diagnostics, and things as well. But when you think about a software product that sells to providers. So let's take an example. We're investors in a company called Incredible Health. Incredible Health is a nursing marketplace. On one side of the business, it sells directly to nurses and nurse practitioners who are looking for part-time or full-time work. And that sort of aggregates supply. Let's say that's the supply side of their marketplace. And then on the demand side of the marketplace, they're going to employers, in this case, large health systems, providers, et cetera, and they're saying, hey, we've got the perfect person you're looking for in that particular role. Well, the question is, each side is going to ask, well, who do you got on the other side, right? There's like kind of a chicken and egg problem. And so what you're really looking for in the early days, what sort of Iman at Incredible Health was really looking for in the early days is, well, I want to go to an employer and I'm going to bring you a lot of potential employees, but I need to kind of know what your needs are. So can you actually share your data with us to figure out, hey, what are the kinds of needs that you need, so that I go build the supply side network. I'll sort of build a network sort of tailored and designed for you. Similarly, on the supply side, going to users and try and ask them, well, what have you made before? What's your salary before? What were you making before? What were you working on before? What kinds of credentials are you at? So all of that is sort of data that you need on both sides. And, the question is, how much are you getting directly from your stakeholder before you're giving them value, versus what is data that you can accumulate from external sources and come to them and sort of check it. And so, Incredible Health did a really compelling job of not only going to supply and demand side, collecting data directly from their prospective customers, bought them in on the vision of, hey, you're not getting a lot of value today, but you're going to get a lot of value in the future. And then in addition to that, working with trade associations, working with nurse advocacy groups to collect data on potential talent pools and bringing sort of like jump-starting the network before they have scale.
There was a lot in that one example. And if I were to kind of zoom out, what I was hearing is using data as a target to know what good looks like, and when you have enough to jumpstart your supply or your demand side. And maybe for people in this challenge, if they're thinking about social determinants challenges and different alternative workforces like community health workers, like what are their needs and how does that add value to a different side of the marketplace, and vice versa? What problem do the community health workers actually solve for the buyer's business? The other thing I heard in there around data was using data from conversations with customers and proprietary data versus public data sets and different publicly available market data, or from friendly channel partners like trade associations, or in the social determinant space. This could be, who are you talking to about this problem? Who's passionate about certain access challenges? Are there nonprofits in that space that might have helpful benchmark data for you to kind of build off of? Was there anything along those lines that okay.
Yeah, no, I think that's dead on. Those are both sort of key points. And the other thing I would offer, just as I reflect on your question, is a lot of times if you're, and this varies based on the type of solutions. I'm trying to give broadly applicable advice. We can do follow-up questions, but I would say, let's say you're building a digital health solution that's a care management solution for a payer, and you're going to manage some portion of their population, and you're going to go at risk, and you're going to make some interventions. You're going to improve the population. You're going to improve the outcomes on some metric for that population. Well, if you're, let's say you're like a company like Time Care, as an example, which is doing exactly what I just described, but specifically focused on cancer patients. Yeah. If you go talk to a health plan in the early days and you say, hey, CMO of Humana, I've got this new solution that's going to manage your cancer care population. It's a really difficult population to care for. And because of your lack of care management, it drives all kinds of increase in medical expenses for your plan. They're going to say, well, great. Do you have any outcomes? Exactly to your point, Julia. And really, you run into another chicken and egg problem where you need one of those pilots to be able to demonstrate the outcomes of your model. And so this was one of the go-to-market strategies that we talked about in the series, which is what we call B2C2B, which is, can you develop a solution and initially go B2C, go directly to consumers and say, hey, this is a lifestyle intervention program, and we're going to help you be healthier. And yes, you may generate a little bit of revenue, but as we discussed, most consumers don't actually pay for their healthcare, and so you may not get a ton of revenue alone just on the B2C channel. But to your point, Julia, you get valuable data, and so we've seen companies like Omada Health, some companies like Marley Medical, like Benchling, a couple others that have sort of Maven in the women's health space that have gone directly to consumer first with the objective to going to the enterprise later. But they test on 500 consumers that have signed up and opted into the program, and then they go to Humana and say, look, we've done a longitudinal clinical trial on 500 of our users, and we've been able to observe these outcomes, and we'd love to do it in your population on a much greater scale and sort of track the same or different outcomes. And so that's one way that we've seen digital health companies kind of overcome the chicken and egg and leverage data and sort of generate data to demonstrate efficacy and outcomes.
Nice. That adds another layer here. And I think I remember from one of those videos that for consumer side, it's around engagement. And that's the biggest problem you're trying to prove out and solve for with your early build tests. And then for the business side, you're trying to talk to your customers and understand what value you can generate with that user engagement. And so to summarize again, we had what data would be useful, figuring out different ways to get it, either customer or externally, and then figuring out how to generate your own early outcomes data in a way that gets you to create value for your buyer. Okay. I'm going to end with just a more general question, hand it off to Katrina, but this one is, what do you wish, very broadly speaking, more students knew about what skills or attributes were essential for those early stage builders?
Yeah, I love this question. I would say the first step is, by the way, just even asking the question. So if you're attending this event, this webinar, and you're even asking yourself the question, what are the skills I need to develop? You're way ahead of the pack. So that is awesome. I would say I'll just sort of continue to hone in on the theme that I think is the most important, which is in addition to studying the skills that you need to build a compelling technology product is to really understand and study distribution. And I think that skill is not talked about enough, particularly when you're building in a complex regulated space like healthcare. Maybe in the retail sector, it's less important. I don't know. I don't spend a lot of time in retail, but certainly in healthcare, distribution is essential. And so there's various different flavors of that. There is sort of the growth marketing type, distribution skill sets that exists a lot in the consumer world. Think how we're all glued to our, phones and TikTok and Instagram and all that, and viral loops and growth hacking and all sort of that world is really valuable to bring into the healthcare world when you think about sort of quote unquote, hacking engagement and nurturing engagement and driving behavior change. And then I would just give you the other branch, which is really studying how enterprises work. I think anything you can do to go spend time and talk to large employers, large health plans, large providers, and ask them how they think. Like, how do they go about ingesting technology? What do they choose to build versus buy versus partner on? Why? All these sorts of things, I think, if you ask those questions, will reveal a lot of nuance on how large enterprises of all type, but certainly in healthcare, actually will ingest the technology that you're talking about.
Well, that's great. And I think that was a thesis of this design challenge, is like, what can we do to get people closer to that actual implementation so that these ideas make its way somewhere? And that's a smooth handoff to Katrina to talk more about business and the go-to-market strategy.
Yeah, thank you, Julia. So I will focus a little bit more on the go-to-market strategy. So as Julia mentioned that you were also working startup before joining A16Z. So we would like to learn more about, like, as a former startup operator, what do you wish you knew earlier about implementation and go-to-market strategies?
Yeah, there's a lot. I'll give you a couple that come to mind immediately. So I was an early employee at Flatiron Health, and what I did not fully appreciate at the time, but only really became clearer in retrospect, was just the difference between the company and the humans that you are individually working with in that company. So when you're trying to do problem discovery and you're looking at different problems that you could go solve, and then you're thinking about building the ROI and the business case for that customer, and you're thinking about the value proposition that they're going to get, and you're thinking about all the different enterprise requirements that they may have, security, et cetera, you're going through all of that. Then you might make a very compelling case for why Aetna should adopt your product, or why Blue Shield of California or Sutter Health or Pfizer should adopt your product. I found in retrospect, it's almost more important to think about why the individual human who you are talking to at that organization should care and adopt your product. Because it turns out that leader within the company is going to spend a disproportionate amount of their time over the next year and the next 5 years working with you and talking about you internally. And there's a good chance that they are going to stake a good portion of their own internal credibility on you. And there's a good chance that if you do really well, that they're going to get a lot of recognition internally for bringing in your solution into Humana. And there's a good chance that they're going to get promoted on your basis. I think for me, it was so interesting in 2015, 16, 17, where I started to see there were directors of real world evidence within pharma. They weren't there before that, not when I first started talking to them. And all of a sudden there were roles with titles that were framed around the category that we were building, which was all around real world data and real world evidence in the oncology setting. And that is awesome. If you see someone getting promoted a role getting created based on the category that you're building, and then it starts to get promoted, turns out they're going to probably be a champion for you for a long time. And so to answer your question, to me, it's equally, if not more important, to think about the ROI and the business case for the individual and individuals that you're working with inside the organization as it is thinking about the value proposition for the organization at large.
Yeah, it's an amazing story. Like you cannot do anything without people and people trying to follow you and like you lead until you reach a common goal. So it's very important to remember like it's not only the data, it's like the people around it that support your work. And yeah, and then like I think that also tied to my next question is that in your view, what are like the most common recent early stage health tech startup fail and how can you avoid those pitfalls?
Yeah, there's a lot, but a couple come to mind. I would say it's sort of related to the first point, which is really understanding, what is the problem that you're solving on multiple levels. So of course, like I'm building a company to solve a problem. Thanks for the obvious advice, Jay. But in reality, what you're looking for is the problem for the organization that you're solving, which is the more obvious one. It's a business problem. We're going to solve it. We're going to generate ROI. We're going to save costs, et cetera. And what's the problem for the individual human that I am working with? So what are their priorities over the course of the year? What are the things that they've already invested in over the last 5 years that maybe are working and are not working? Which ones are they trying to save? Which ones are they trying to not? If you're a care management solution for a particular indication, like where does oncology stack rank on the medical expense line items for a Medicare Advantage plan that you're talking to? Is that the number 1 category? Is it the number 2, 3, 4 category? Is that better? Maybe they already have a solution for number 1, but number 4, it's too complicated. They haven't prioritized it and they're running way behind 3 years later, which is a lot of what time care hears. And so they really need something for oncology. And here you go. Boom. So I'm actually not solving the number 1 problem for the organization today, perhaps, but for the individual that you're talking to, it's a huge problem because they've been on the hook for doing it, for putting something together for the last 3 years, but haven't been able to prioritize it. And so, so that would be the one thing that I really would keep in mind.
Got it. Thank you for sharing. And as you mentioned that there's like a lot of different like customer within like and stakeholder within the healthcare system. So like technically, how would you recommend approaching potential customer for the startups?
Yeah. So I have 2 quick pieces of advice. The first, and they're very related. The first is that so everyone on this call is interested in technology. We're techno optimists. We love technology. I certainly love technology. And yet technology is not relevant to the customer. And so what they are trying to solve is a business problem, and technology is a potential solution to it. And so that sort of manifests in 2 pieces of advice. The first is, well, if we're selling technology, who should we talk to? Probably the chief technology officer of the company or the chief information officer. And oftentimes the centralized technology groups are the first individuals who are approached. And yet we've already talked about the fact that you got to solve the organization's problem and the human's problem. So more often than not, the CIO or the CTO are not the ones actually owning your problem. They're responsible and being pulled in to solve potential problems for the business all over. But who are the humans within Pfizer who are actually owning the problem, not the solution? And go talk to them. And it depends on, like, the answer is it depends, which is, grossly unsatisfying, I imagine, but like do the LinkedIn scans and try to figure out who's actually LinkedIn and Twitter posting about the problem, not the solution. Like not the people who are posting about here's how innovative we are and bringing all these solutions are, who's actually complaining about the problem. Whose LinkedIn title is actually suggesting that they're responsible for the P&L, like the actual profit and loss of that this solution would potentially have an impact on, and go talk to them. And so that's the sort of the specific sort of area that I would focus on within them. And then when you go talk to them, understand what is already on their roadmap. What have they already tried? What's their build versus buy framework? And what's their best alternative to you? Is the alternative not do anything? Is the alternative go build something internally? Is the alternative, hire a consulting firm to do it, which, is no downside risk because no one gets, what's the old saying? No one gets fired for hiring IBM or hiring IBM, which is obviously incredibly dated, or like no one gets fired for hiring McKinsey. Like maybe they just hire a consulting firm to solve the problem you're talking about, or Palantir or Accenture or whatever. Like, why should they take a risk on a small startup like you? And so those are the kinds of things that I would think about once you start putting yourself in the shoes of the individual human within the organization and the problem that they are dealing with.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. It's really important to remember that there's like a human behind the problem, and you're trying to solve something that like the people are facing the problem every day, and there will be the user and maybe not the CTO. And before I open it to the audience for questions, I have one last question for Jay. So there's like there's different stakeholders. There's like hospital, payers, provider, and consumers. In your experience, how does selling to those different? Like, does it vary between different stakeholders?
So it's such an interesting question because they are very different. What they care about is very different. Their business models, their P&L structures, how they make money, who they sell to, what matters to them, all very different. And so I have two pieces of advice. One, if you're selling to any one of these groups, study them, learn the lingo, understand, if you're selling to pharma, what is the difference between medical affairs and health economics and outcomes research and commercial and market access? These are all business unit names that matter to them, and they mean different things from different companies. And if you go talk to a provider or a health plan, understand, what a health plan means when they talk about population health management versus network analytics versus, so on and so forth. You got to learn the lingo and you got to understand that, no question. And then my second piece of advice is I would throw that all out in the sense that you've got to keep all those things in mind, but also what's almost more interesting is what makes all these stakeholders similar than what makes them different. And what makes them similar is if you are selling a product to any one of these enterprises, they care about three things: increasing revenue, lowering cost, reducing risk. Anything else is kind of window dressing to one of those three things. You might say like, well, do they care about consumer NPS? Yes, they do, only to the effect that it increases revenue, lowers cost, or reduces risk. And so anything that you pitch to any of those groups has to have a crystal clear value proposition on one of those three dimensions. Learn the lingo, learn what makes them, tick, how they operate, understand their business, but then keep in mind it's one of those three things that will drive them to either adopt your solution or not.
Awesome. I think Julia have one more question, so I will hand it to her.
If I could just follow up on that one, I think tactically the learning the lingo is one I've struggled with just because I haven't had a niche within healthcare yet, and I've been trying to broadly learn, which I assume a lot of the students at this stage, a lot of people don't have much familiarity with social determinants of health if they're haven't been in that space before. I try to ask questions, and every time someone says an unfamiliar word or acronym, just take notes. And then my follow-up with buyers is to read the web, like the Google or ChatGPT denotation, like the definition, and then ask them about the connotation and what those words mean to them and how they react strongly. Were there any, how have you had someone do that kind of to you where they come in not knowing a basic term, and how have people kind of, well, let me rephrase this. So Nat and shoot, I'm blanking on and Zach, the founders of Flatiron, your last start, were very young without a healthcare background when they started their healthcare company. I'm sure they had to walk into many rooms where there are not industry players or veterans. They were not clinicians. Like, how have you seen people handle that gap in lingo so they're not waiting until they have every word down before they start talking to customers?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think the key is humility. The one word answer is humility, which is no one expects you to know everything. No one knows everything. And so so it's okay to just say, I don't know, or, oh, interesting, I don't know that term, or write down that term and document it later and, go look it up in ChatGPT or Perplexity or whatever. I mean, the tools available now at our fingertips are even better than they were 5 years ago to get to truth. So that's awesome. just don't ever pretend that you don't. And then once you do, you can follow up. I think the disaster that I've seen a lot of tech entrepreneurs fall into coming outside of healthcare and coming into healthcare is sort of not appreciating the laws of physics that exist within our healthcare system, the incentives, the money flows, how things work, why they work that way. It doesn't mean that you have to take everything as gospel. We can change it, we can adapt it, we can try new things, but to appreciate that and come at that with a level of humility. It sounds, if you're listening to me and you're thinking to yourself that, wow, that sounds like a really basic piece of advice, you're already miles ahead. Because I've seen that trap happen over and over again amongst entrepreneurs, and it sets them back years, because once you lose credibility with the buyer, it's very difficult to get back.
Okay. And then I liked your second piece of advice from the last response, which was around increasing revenue, reducing costs, reducing risk. I guess the first obvious thing there is you have to figure out what your customer views as their main revenue drivers, their main costs, and their main risks there. Do you have any suggestions for how to start, let's say, an initial conversation with someone where you don't know their business at all? Because there are a lot of complexities in learning how healthcare businesses work.
Yeah. So I would say, it starts with just figuring out what you can figure out without talking to them first. So
Yeah.
There's a lot more tools now than there ever have been to really understand how a business works, what matters to them, et cetera. If you're talking to a public company, all their earnings transcripts are public. You can read through them. There are report after report after report that is published on all of these organizations. There's so many blogs and online journals that have popped up that are analyzing every single healthcare company, public and private. VCs are putting tons of content out there. I mean, all that stuff is on there on the internet. And then in addition to that, a lot more people are going direct. So that the person that you're talking to, or at least someone on their team or in their org, has posted stuff on LinkedIn and Twitter and various different places about what matters to them. Listen, do that and sort of take that into account, so that when you reach out to the person that that you want to engage with and potentially deploy your solution with, cold emails work. I get more
Yes.
cold emails now than I ever have, and I still respond to them, because a really good, well-crafted cold email works. And so how do you make a good crafted cold email work? You basically are presetting the agenda of the meeting and their excitement in the cold email. And there's a good chance, by the way, if you frame anything that you're talking about in that email around this is going to help you drive revenue, reduce cost, or reduce risk, there's a good chance that you're already in the top 10, 20% of cold emails. And then from there, everything else is personalization and nuance. And then to answer the last part of your question, when you get on the phone with them, use that as the jumping off point. Mm-hmm. It sounds like from your CEO's last earning transcript, nice, and he said X, Y, and Z, it sounds like you're really concerned about Medicaid redetermination, which is going to reduce enrollment and increase your sales and marketing expense for acquiring new members for your health plan. Like, wow, that is public information that you got, and you directly understand what we've been talking about internally for the last 6 months. That's a free one, take it. And like, that's how you set yourself apart. And then because you say, it sounds like, there's a good chance that they will add in additional information that you couldn't have gathered. And you've already sort of anchored the conversation around one of those three things, and they're sharing information for you, and you just got to listen.
Awesome. Okay. I've taken more time than I expected because I really wanted to dig into some of those answers. But handing it off to audience questions, where I think Rinky has one, if she would be down to unmute and ask her question.
Hey Jay, thank you for your valuable insights. This was really, really helpful. I'm a clinician, so it's always nice to kind of hear the other side of the story, especially for someone like you who's connected to all of these different stakeholders. I have two questions if we have the time to get to them, but my first one is, as a clinician with 15 years of experience who's recently got into like digital health and health tech consulting, I'm still seeing that clinician involvement is kind of limited to advisory roles, very underutilized, and I think it's so needed. How do we as clinicians better position ourselves with these companies beyond those traditional, be on the board, or just help us with advice on product to really help with their go-to-market process and clinical product development?
Both great questions. Thank you for asking. The first is it's totally an issue. There are not enough clinicians. So first of all, there's not enough clinicians, period. So just in care delivery, we have mass labor shortages. Supply is not meeting demand. Most wages are going way up disproportionately. That obviously it's great that people are earning more wages, but on the other hand, it's really harming the economic viability of a lot of these systems. Record clinician shortages, record nurse shortages, record med school dropout rates, record clinician suicide rates during COVID. I mean, it's a real problem. So we don't have enough clinicians, period. We can talk about that. And then certainly we don't have enough clinicians coming into the healthcare sort of technology system. And I agree, there are a lot that are coming in, a lot of times in advisory roles and part-time roles, because maybe they're still practicing or something else. I have a lot of clinician friends in healthcare, and the ones that seem to me, this is just my personal experience, who seem to have the greatest impact are the ones who have the biggest ears. And what I mean by that is they are learning machines. They are listening and understanding and asking questions to understand. They're clearly an expert in clinical care, and they're understanding all the other components of that. And as a result of that, they're having an outsized impact in offering not only their own clinical judgment on what the care model of this company should be, but also judgment on other things that are non-clinical, because they're experts oftentimes in a lot of different things. And so at least to me, my experience has been the most impactful clinicians have that approach. To your second question, it's so important. I mean, the reality is that we are in a very regulated space. So some of these go-to-market strategies that I've described can help you accelerate getting to market and help you, get potential user feedback, but only works for certain types of products. So perhaps you want to go B2C to B with a medical scribe, and you can, sell directly to clinicians, in private practice. And so long as you have all the sort of security requirements, like you can get adoption there, maybe not at a large enterprise. But if you're talking about you're talking about a care model that's going to actually deliver care, well, like that has to go through a regulatory process. You can't go B2C to B for that. It's an entirely different angle. And so my nuance there, which is sort of matters, the go-to-market strategy that you take has to be customized to what you're building and what makes sense in that setting. The one sort of optimistic take that I would give for you is that there are technologists across all verticals that are trying to figure out how to commercialize AI, and all the dazzling features of large language models, et cetera. People are trying to figure out how to commercialize that and get into workflow. And a lot of my friends in other industries have sort of tell me like, wow, that healthcare has a much more developed regulatory framework for AI than a lot of other verticals do. Like there's been a lot of work that the FDA has done around software as a medical device. There's a lot of, there are many FDA approved AI algorithms. There's actually like a pretty well-trodden regulatory pathway for a lot of these innovative new products. It's still not easy. It's still not, entirely straightforward, but I would sort of just push people to think that there are a lot more creative ways to get products to market, even in healthcare, despite the very important regulatory and clinical considerations for some of these products.
Thank you.
I kind of want to add that a meta theme around learning about all of these different things and policy and challenges in healthcare is turning those constraints into an advantage, like new creative approaches to an advantage, because you're aware that those are part of the law of physics in healthcare, that there is a regulatory framework and a safety profile that's required to get anything through. And so, yeah, hopefully that's turning it into more of an advantage than a disadvantage, that you have to follow all of these safety protocols. Hand it off to Veena if she can unmute and ask a question.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Perfect, thanks. So thank you for the session, and it was great to learn about like how you can make your ideas become practical solutions in the healthcare industry. So I have two questions, and my first one is, when a solution that you have is made largely to benefit individuals like patients, how do founders identify markets where they can receive funding for their product, or like identify businesses that would benefit from the solution?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'll sort of try to generalize it a little bit, but the devil's in the details, obviously. I think the entrepreneurs who I've seen do this the best, they start with an intervention. Let's say they're going direct to consumer. They start with an intervention, and then they ask themselves, who stands to benefit most from this thing working? And when you do that, you can start to think about who else you want to go talk to. So let's say, I'm just going to make this up. Like, let's say you've got a solution that helps me exercise more and take care of my, stay on my medication more frequently, sleep better, and manage my chronic disease that I have. Well, certainly the consumer benefits. So like, I would pay for that, but maybe not all consumers would, and maybe they wouldn't pay very much to justify the product development that you have. Well, who would stand to benefit? Well, if I have a chronic disease and I'm at risk for being hospitalized, then certainly like my health insurer would stand to benefit. And then you have to ask the question, well, what kind of insurance plan do I have? Well, for a commercial insurance plan, the average tenure of a member on a commercial insurance plan is 2 to 3 years. So unfortunately, maybe my commercial insurer doesn't care very much. But let's say I'm talking about my mother who's on a Medicare Advantage plan in Florida, and she's going to stay with that plan for a long time. The sort of the lifetime value of that member to the health plan is much longer, and so they're actually much more interested in some of those social determinant of health, like interventions to improve to sort of drive improvement on the social determinants of health that matter. And so now you all of a sudden have sort of transformed your solution to say, yes, it's a consumer solution that benefits the patient, but actually what I should be focused on is Medicare Advantage members, Medicare Advantage members and Medicare Advantage plans, because they have, they stand to benefit the most from me being healthier. And like that's just one example, just to give you a quick sense that I've seen, entrepreneurs take to figure out, okay, I know who my user is. I'm solving a problem for the user. Who's going to pay for this? And you kind of go through that idea maze, if you will, to figure out where to go.
Sure, thank you. And my second question is, do you have any advice on finding unconventional customers to benefit from your products? Like instead of just focusing on insurance companies or like people who provide insurance, how do you discover non-traditional customers for your product? Like perhaps maybe not even directly related to the healthcare industry.
Yeah, so at first it starts with what the ambition of the company is, which is the company, like who are you actually building the company for? If you're building it for a small set of individuals who desperately need this product or service or intervention, then just go find those individuals, whether they're traditional or not is less relevant, but like just go after them. If your objective is, well, I want to reach 100 million people, and I want 100 million people or 1 billion people to use this solution, well, I would sort of think through what is traditional and non-traditional customers to go after to sort of lily pad your way there, and what are the and sort of my initial customers that I'm going after, how broadly representative are they of the 100 million individuals that I eventually want to reach? So for example, if you've built, I'm just going to make this up to be ridiculous, like let's say you're building a product you want to reach, you're building a solution for all mammals, right? You might want to go after, mammal type 1 and mammal type 2. But if you go then start selling to reptiles, and again, just to be ridiculous, just to make the point, you might say, well, like reptiles are non-traditional customers, but I think they really need this solution. It's like, well, that's great, but then how transferable is your solution between reptiles and mammals? And again, I realize how ridiculous this solution, this example is, but like just to give you a sense for sometimes the definition of like, well, it might actually be ridiculous to go after these four really, bizarre animals, but they're actually all mammals and they all have something in common, and I'm going to go after them. That would sort of be the way that I would think about how you're picking your early set of customers is, are they representative of the larger population that you ultimately want to address with this company?
Thank you for the insights.
And I keep saying this in every call when it comes up for the application, a narrow target segment that you can define well, that you've talked to people that all have similar characteristics, and you're starting to understand any segment of potential buyers is going to be more likely impactful than a broad understanding of a really broad market. So there's no right answer in the early stages. It's just kind of iterating and testing. And we'll do a lot in October to support finding access to new buyers, working with data, like all of these pieces that we think make for a more compelling solution. So great questions. We probably have time for one more if anyone has any questions here.
I can ask if no one else wants to ask. I will stay for the audience, obviously, but I will chime in if no one else. Okay. Hi, Jay. Thanks so much for being here. My name is Sherry. I was the person that is muting people. Apologize if so yeah, I am a bioengineering PhD training in training. So I guess I'm kind of in the space of like bioinformatics, trying to build, functional genomic tools. I'm actually a bit curious about like sort of the strategy behind Flatiron. I know you're like one of the early members. Just curious, like my understanding of Flatiron is kind of a data solution across like all healthcare delivery sort of life cycles. Just curious, like when you start off the company, like did you have kind of your target like customer in mind, or did you like come up with like a really mature technology or use case for the data first, and then you go out and look for your potential buyer?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, because the reality is that a lot of it was discovered as time passed. So whether you look at Flatiron or you look at a lot of startups, when they're successful and they get acquired or they IPO, you'll read the articles about them, and I certainly felt this way when you read about the articles about Flatiron. It's like it feels like they're written with like a feather and ink, and it's just this brilliant strategy that was executed from day one, and they knew exactly who they were targeting and kind of evolved that over time. But having been in a company like that, and having advised 10, 20, 50 companies that have been doing this over the last 6 years, like it's remarkably different than that. I think the reality is the entrepreneurs who I've seen do it best are hypothesis driven, and they follow the scientific method, but they apply it to company building. So they have a very strong hypothesis on who's my initial target customer, who's my product, here's what's going to go, here's what I think will work, and then I'm going to go to collect some data over the next 30 days, 90 days, 6 months, et cetera. And I'm going to prove or disprove, I'm like reject or fail to reject my null hypothesis and just roll from there. And that was our experience at Flatiron. That's experience I've seen in a lot of companies, where you're just constantly iterating to figure out, okay, well, now we've got product market fit with this single user for the single product. Where do we expand? Do we sell the same product to new users? Do we sell new products to our same users? Do we sell new products to new users? And you're just constantly sort of expanding and evolving from there. And so, the best piece of advice I could give, at least from what I've seen work, is just follow the scientific method that you all know well. Have high conviction in your hypotheses and go test them.
Got it. Thank you so much.
Your hypothesis should be around building business value somewhere in your approach, rather than just a technology or cool.
Yeah, I mean, I think
cool
it's a bit
technology.
challenging when you're trying to develop like a science-centric sort of products, as opposed to more like market
Mhm.
catering product because there's like the scientific risk. And like, you know, when you, for example, when you try to do data collection, they're not like obviously sort of as available as some of the market data that you're trying to acquire. So I think it requires more like careful curation there when you think about like, okay, what kind of product you're trying to build and who you're trying to.
I feel like some of the deep tech things is on the translation piece, which even after all the scientific risk and like technical risk, you still go through all this market building, finding the customer and trying to get it to someone. So maybe it's just done in different phases because of how deep research is expensive and needs different types of funding. But we're at time, so I'm going to quickly end on a couple slides. If my computer's gonna let me do it. Oh no, this is why I don't share screen. Long story short, Akash brought it up. I hope y'all can still hear me. Akash brought it up. We have one more speaker on Friday who will talk about leadership and change management in implementing different healthcare systems and what that requires. My computer froze completely. Oh no.
While you're saying that, and maybe it's more to say thank you so much for the questions and joining. We are all now in each other's networks, so definitely add me on LinkedIn or follow me on Twitter or whatever. And thank you to the whole full group here, Julia and everyone for including me.
And we have to do a bunch of thank yous, which is why I have to get to this last slide of all the partners and sponsors that have gotten us to this point and believing in that we're bringing something new to the table with this challenge. So I'm hoping it'll let me share. Oh no, here we go. Okay, so special thank you to all of our partners. If you can see my screen.
Thank you so much. Take care, everyone.
Awesome.
Thank you, Jay.